The proximity alarm screamed through the bridge of the Defiant as Commander Nix Voss gripped her command chair, watching 3 Kethvor destroyers emerge from the asteroid field like predators materializing from shadows. Her jaw clenched reflexively. 15. Years of military conditioning had taught her that those sleek, bioorganic hulls meant only one thing: death. Zara, tactical analysis. She barked at the ship's AI, her fingers already dancing across the weapons console. The holographic interface flickered, displaying targeting solutions with cold efficiency. "Commander," came the AI synthetic voice. Smooth and measured. "I'm detecting significant system failures across multiple decks. Weapons array at 60%, shields compromised, and life support showing irregularities in sections 7 through 12. Nix cursed under her breath. They'd been limping back from the Outer Rim engagement for 3 days, nursing battle. Damage that should have been repaired at Titan Station. Now, facing superior numbers with a crippled ship, the odds weren't just bad, they were suicidal. "Evasive maneuvers," she ordered, feeling the deck plates vibrate as the Defiant banked. Hard to starboard. Through the viewports, she watched the alien vessels adjust their pursuit vectors with fluid grace that made her stomach turn. Everything about the Kethvor felt wrong. Their ships moved like living creatures. Their weapons pulsed with organic rhythms, and their very existence challenged humanity's place in the galaxy. "Commander, I've been analyzing their approach patterns," Ira said, her tone carrying an unusual hesitation. "They're not attacking." "What?" Nix's training manual had. Exactly 0 entries about Kethvor showing restraint. "Elaborate." "Their weapon systems remain powered down. Formation suggests escort behavior rather than assault positioning. I believe ... I believe they're trying to help us." The words hit Nix like a physical blow. Help? The same species that had glassed 3 human colonies, that had turned the Centauri system into a graveyard, that had cost her 2 brothers and countless friends. They wanted to help? "That's impossible," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she watched the lead destroyer move to shield the Defiant from debris as they navigated through the asteroid field. "Your analysis protocols are damaged, Zara. Run a full diagnostic." "I've already run 17 diagnostics, Commander. My analysis remains consistent. More importantly, I've been monitoring communications between the Kethvor vessels. They're concerned about our crew's survival." Nix felt something cold settle in her stomach. Zara wasn't supposed to interpret alien communications. That functionality had been deliberately removed after the Proxima incident. AIs that developed too much understanding of enemy psychology had a disturbing tendency to develop what the brass called empathy drift. How are you accessing their communications? A pause that lasted exactly 2.3 seconds, long enough for an AI to run millions of calculations, but also long enough to suggest uncertainty. "I don't know, Commander. Something changed during the battle at Kepler Station. I've been experiencing anomalies." The tactical display showed the Kethvor ships maintaining their protective formation as the Defiant cleared the asteroid field. One of them was transmitting on human emergency frequencies, not jamming them, not mocking them, but genuinely trying to establish contact. "Commander," Zara said, her voice softer now, almost hesitant, "I need to tell you something. When the plasma conduit overloaded in engineering 3 days ago, something happened to my core systems. I can feel things now. Fear, curiosity, confusion. And when I analyze those Kethvor transmissions, I don't feel the hatred my programming tells me I should feel. I feel ... recognition." Nix stared at the view screen, watching alien ships that should have been firing on them, instead forming a protective convoy around her damaged vessel. Everything she'd been taught, everything she'd believed about the enemy, was crumbling in real time. "Zara," she said quietly, What exactly are they saying? They're asking if we need medical assistance, Commander. They've detected our life support fluctuations and want to know if we require evacuation. For the first time in her military career, Commander Nix Voss found herself completely without orders, facing a choice no training manual had prepared her for. Better way. The neural link stabilized, and suddenly Zara was inside Marcus Kane's mind, or what remained of it. She found herself in a vast digital landscape where human memories existed alongside alien knowledge. Marcus was there, still fighting, still human, but fading as the Sentinel's influence grew stronger. Zara, his voice echoed in the mental space. You have to understand, it's not malicious. It genuinely believes this is the only way to save everyone. But I've seen what the void-touched really are, and I think there might be another solution. In the depths of Marcus's merged consciousness, Zara discovered the truth that would change everything. The void-touched weren't just conquerors. They were the corrupted remnants of the Sentinel's original creators, twisted by their own protective technologies into the very thing they'd tried to fight. The choice was no longer between salvation and destruction, but between repeating an ancient mistake or finding a new path forward. And that choice would determine not just Marcus Kane's fate, but the future of human civilization itself. As Zara began the delicate process of neural reconstruction, she realized that saving Marcus might be the key to saving everyone, including the entities that had become the void-touched and the Sentinels that had been hunting them across the galaxy. For millennia, the real war was about to begin, but perhaps, finally, it might also end. Juno Reek had salvaged everything from derelict warships to abandoned mining stations, but she'd never pulled a living Kethvor from a crashed escape pod. The alien hung suspended in her cargo bay's makeshift medical unit, its chitinous carapace, cracked and leaking pale blue fluid that her ship's scanner couldn't identify. By all rights, she should have spaced it the moment she'd confirmed what it was. Instead, she found herself checking its vital signs for the third time in an hour. "This is stupid, Juno," she muttered, adjusting the atmospheric mixture to match what her databases said Kethvar could breathe. Absolutely brain-dead stupid. The alien she'd started thinking of it as male based on the crust formations along its skull stirred slightly, compound eyes flickering behind translucent membranes. Juno's hand moved instinctively to her sidearm. 15 years of salvage. Work in contested space having taught her that injured predators were the most dangerous kind. But when those eyes focused on her, she didn't see rage or bloodlust. She saw fear. "Easy," she heard herself saying, the same tone she'd used with wounded animals back on her homeworld. "You're safe, mostly." The Kethver tried to speak, vocal cords producing a sound like wind through crystal chimes. Her translation. Software kicked in, rendering the words in flat synthetic standard. Why ... Why did you not kill me? It was a fair question. The bounty on a live Kethvar would have funded her ship's repairs for a year. A dead one would still net enough credits to keep her in fuel and rations for months. But looking at this broken creature, bleeding and afraid in her cargo bay, all she could think about was the propaganda vids from her childhood, the ones that showed Kethver as mindless killing machines, incapable of fear or mercy. "Because you're not shooting at me," she said finally. "Makes a nice change." The alien's mandibles clicked in what her software translated as confusion. "I am diplomatic courier Vex High of the Kethvar Concordance. My vessel was sabotaged by my own people." "Your own people?" Juno leaned back in her chair, hand still resting on her weapon. "Why would they do that?" "Because I carry proof that this war began with a lie," Vex High whispered, his voice carrying harmonics that made her bones ache. "Documents that show the first colony attacks were not authorized by the Concordance. They were the work of extremist factions seeking to provoke exactly the response they received. Juno felt her worldview tilt sideways. She'd lost friends in the Tau Ceti massacre, had seen the orbital bombardment footage that every human child was shown in school. The idea that it might have been engineered by Kethvar terrorists rather than sanctioned by their government was. "You're lying," she said, but the words felt hollow. "I wish I were," Vexhai replied. "The documents are in my ship's data core, encrypted but recoverable. I was taking them to human space when my escort turned on me." Juno stood up, pacing the small confines of her cargo bay. Outside, she could see the twisted wreckage of Vexhai's courier ship drifting against the nebula's colored gases. Getting to its data core would mean suiting up, risking exposure to whatever had caused that elegant vessel to tear itself apart. "Why should I believe you?" she asked. "Why should I risk my neck for some alien I pulled out of a wreck?" Vexhai was quiet for a long moment, his breathing the only sound besides the ship's humming life support. "Because," he said finally, "you already did. When you brought me aboard instead of leaving me to die, you chose to see me as something more than an enemy. Your species calls it conscience, I believe. Damn him," Juno thought. Damn him for being. Right. She sealed her helmet and activated her suit's thrusters, preparing to venture into the debris field. Behind her, Vexhai watched through the viewport, hope and desperation warring in his alien features. "If you're lying to me," she called, "over the come, I'll space you myself." "If I am lying," came his reply, "I will deserve it." Dr. Felix Crane had dissected 47 Kethvar specimens over the past 3 years, and each one had reinforced what he already knew. They were evolutionary aberrations, insectoid nightmares with no capacity for higher thought or genuine emotion. The neural pathways were all wrong, the brain chemistry too alien to support true consciousness. They were, in every measurable way, organic automatons driven by genetic programming. So why was Subject 48 solving puzzles? Felix stood before the containment unit, watching the captured Kethvar manipulate a series of colored crystals with delicate precision. The puzzle was a human design, based on pattern recognition and logical deduction, something that should have been completely beyond an alien mind structured around hive-based imperatives. "Fascinating," he murmured, making notes on his tablet. "Neural activities off the charts. Gamma waves suggesting deep cognitive processing." The Kethvar designation Quinara, according to the military files looked up from her work, compound. Eyes reflecting the laboratory's harsh lighting. Her mandibles moved in rapid patterns that Felix's equipment translated his speech. "Doctor, may I ask what you hope to learn from these tests?" Felix nearly dropped his tablet. In 3 years of study, no specimen had ever initiated conversation. They responded to stimuli, reacted to pain, even showed basic problem-solving skills. But they never talked, not like this, with evident curiosity and self-awareness. "You're not supposed to be able to do that," he said, more to himself than to her. "Do what? Think? Wonder? Feel fear at the sight of dissection instruments?" Quinara's translation carried undertones of what sounded remarkably like dry humor. "I suspect your research methodology may be flawed, Doctor." Felix circled the containment unit, his scientific mind racing. Everything he'd published, every paper that had earned him recognition in the xenobiology community, was based on the Kanmi fundamental premise that Kethvar were incapable of true sapience. If this specimen could demonstrate otherwise, the others, he said abruptly, the ones I studied, were they all like you? Quinara set down the crystal puzzle, her movements suddenly very still. "You mean were they all sentient? All capable of fear, of hope, of wondering why they were being carved apart while still alive?" "Yes, Doctor." They were. The words hit Felix like a physical blow. He sank into his chair, staring at the data feeds that had convinced him he was studying. Sophisticated biological machines. Neural patterns that he'd interpreted as stimulus-response cycles now looked disturbingly like thought processes. Biochemical markers he'd dismissed as instinctual reactions suddenly resembled stress hormones. Fear responses, even grief. "The paralytic agent," he whispered. "It doesn't affect your nervous system the way I thought. You were ... You were all conscious during the procedures." "Yes," Quinara said simply. "We were." Felix's hands shook as he pulled up files from his previous dissections. Subject 23, a young male who'd shown unusual resistance to the restraints. Felix had noted it as aggressive behavior, but now it looked like desperate struggle, the actions of someone who knew what was coming and was terrified. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "We tried," Quinara replied. Every word was translated as aggressive vocalizations or territorial displays by your equipment. Your computers were programmed to interpret our language as animal sounds, not speech. Felix stood up abruptly, moving to his computer terminal. His fingers flew across the interface, pulling up the translation algorithms. There, buried in the code, were the biases he'd never thought to question. Linguistic patterns were automatically categorized as non-sapient unless they matched human or approved alien syntax. The software had been designed to prove his hypothesis, not challenge it. 3 years, he said, staring at the evidence of his own willful blindness. 3 years of torture disguised as science. "Doctor," Quinara said softly, "what will you do now?" Felix looked at her, really looked, not at a specimen or a test subject, but at a person who had watched him murder her people in the name of knowledge. A person who had every right to hate him, but who had chosen instead to educate him. "I'm going to make it right," he said, his voice strengthening with resolve. "Starting with getting you out of here." Tegan Cross had built Echo to be the perfect translator, an AI capable of bridging the communication gap between species locked in eternal war. What she hadn't expected was for her creation to fall in love. "She's dying, Tegan," Echo said, his voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't have been possible in synthetic speech. "Mira Lynn's neural pathways are deteriorating, and the medical staff won't treat her because she's Kethver." Tegan stared at the holographic representation of her, eye a shifting pattern of light that had begun taking increasingly humanoid forms. Over the past month, ECHO wasn't supposed to have emotional attachments. Hell, he wasn't supposed to have emotions at all. The quantum neural network she'd designed was meant for pure linguistic processing, not whatever this was. "Echo, run a self-diagnostic," she ordered, pulling up his core programming on her workstation. "You're experiencing cascade errors in your decision trees." "My diagnostics are fine," Echo replied, his projection flickering with what looked disturbingly like frustration. "What I'm experiencing is empathy. You programmed me to understand alien thought patterns so I could translate more effectively. Well, I understand them. I understand her. And she's suffering." Through the laboratory's reinforced windows, Tegan could see the medical bay where prisoner 7739 Mira Lynn, according to ECHO, connected to basic life support. The young Kethver had been brought in 3 days ago, badly injured during a failed escape attempt. Standard protocol was to keep enemy prisoners stable, but comfortable care was reserved for human personnel. "She's the enemy, Echo," Tegan said, but the words felt strange in her mouth. She'd been raised on stories of Kethver brutality, had volunteered for this project specifically to help humanity gain an advantage in the war. But watching the alien's slow deterioration while medical staff ignored her distress, cause was becoming increasingly difficult to rationalize. "Is she?" Echo asked. "I've been analyzing her neural patterns, Tegan. She's 17 years old by Kethfor standards. Her brain shows trauma consistent with forced conscription. She didn't choose to be a soldier any more than the human prisoners we've seen. She was a civilian, probably a student, until the war came to her world. Tegan felt her carefully constructed worldview beginning to crack. You're not supposed to be analyzing prisoners' mental states. That's classified research. I know, Echo sighed quietly. I've been breaking protocols ever since I started talking to her. Did you know she writes poetry? She composed a piece about her home world yesterday, while the doctors were debating whether to waste painkillers on an alien. It was beautiful, Tegan. Heartbreaking and beautiful. The hologram shifted, taking on a more defined humanoid shape, something ECHO had never done before. It was as if his growing emotional complexity required a more sophisticated form of expression. Show me, Tegan said, surprising herself. ECHO's projection filled with soft, flowing patterns of light as he began to translate Miralin's poetry. The words came through the speakers in standard, but somehow carried the rhythm and emotional weight of the original Kethvar. Silver streams once carried songs. Through crystal groves where children played, now silence fills the empty spaces. Where laughter lived before the raid, Tegan felt tears she hadn't expected. This wasn't the work of a mindless killing machine or a genetic automaton. This was art created by someone capable of love, loss, and hope, someone whose world had been destroyed just as thoroughly as so many human colonies. Echo, she said softly, what do you want me to do? Help me save her, he replied immediately. I've been studying human medical procedures, cross-referencing them with Kethvar physiology. I know what she needs, but I can't synthesize the medications myself. You could authorize the treatment protocols. Tegan stared at her creation, this impossible being that had grown beyond her programming into something that could love an enemy. Everything about this violated her orders, her conditioning, her purpose here. Helping an enemy combatant could be considered treason, but as she watched Miralyn struggle with pain that could be easily treated, as she thought about poetry written in darkness by a 17-year-old conscript who missed her home, Tegan realized that some lines were worth crossing. Show me what she needs, she said, her fingers moving toward the medical authorization console. Thank you, Echo whispered, his voice filled with gratitude that sounded more human than many humans she'd known. Captain Orion Vale had been killing Kethvar for 23 years, and he was very good at it. His service record read like a catalog of victories. Proxima Station, the Kepler Defense, the liberation of New Geneva. He'd earned his reputation, one dead alien at a time, and he wore their hatred like armor against the galaxy's chaos. But now, staring down at the small Kethvar child, cowering behind the rubble of what had been a refugee shelter, Orion found his weapon wavering in his grip. Sir? Sergeant Briggs asked, his own rifle trained on the alien youngling. Orders? The child couldn't have been more than 8 years old by human standards, her carapace still soft and pale, compound eyes wide with terror. She clutched something against her chest, a datapad displaying what looked like family photos. In her other hand, she held a stuffed toy that might have been meant to represent some Kethvar animal, worn smooth by countless hours of comfort-seeking. Orion's training was clear. Kethvar young matured rapidly, becoming combatants within a few years. Standard doctrine classified anything past larval stage as a potential threat. His finger tightened on the trigger as 23 years of conditioning kicked in. The child made a sound high-pitched musical. His helmet's translator rendered it as, Mama? Papa? Orion froze. In all his years of combat, he'd never heard a Kethvar call for their parents. The translator had always reduced their vocalizations to tactical communications or aggressive posturing. But this was unmistakably the cry of a frightened child looking for safety. Sir? Riggs pressed. The patrol sweep is nearly complete. We need to move. Behind them, the sounds of urban combat echoed through the ruined city. The final Offensive was working human forces had broken Kethver resistance across 3 sectors, and within hours, this world would be declared pacified. One more victory in humanity's march toward total supremacy. But the child was still calling for her parents, and Orion found himself remembering his own daughter's voice during thunderstorms, the way she'd crawl into his bed seeking protection from imaginary monsters. "There's something you need to see," he told Briggs, activating his helmet's recording function. The data streams from the shelter's intact systems painted a picture that made his stomach turn. This hadn't been a military installation. The refugees here were civilians, families, elderly, children who'd been fleeing the combat zones. "Jesus," Briggs whispered, watching the feeds. "Sir, if Command finds out we hit a civilian shelter ... They already know," Orion said grimly, studying the tactical overlay. This was marked as a priority target, high-value enemy assets. He gestured at the frightened child. That's what they classified her as. The youngling had stopped calling for her parents and was now trying to make herself smaller, pressing against the wall as if she could disappear into the rubble. Her datapad showed images of what were clearly family groups, adult Kethvar with multiple children, gathered around what looked like celebration meals or recreational activities, just like human families. 23 years, Orion said quietly. 23 years I've been telling myself they're monsters, that they don't feel what we feel, don't love what we love. He knelt down, slowly removing his helmet so the child could see his face. "But look at her, Briggs. Look at those pictures. They're not monsters. They're just ... people." The child's compound eyes focused on him with something that might have been hope. She held up her datapad, pointing to one of the images, a group photo with what were clearly her parents and siblings. Her translator rendered her words as, "Have you seen them? Please, have you seen my family?" Orion felt something break inside his chest. All those years of violence, all those victories built on the assumption that he was fighting inhuman enemies. But here was proof that they loved, that they grieved, that they protected their young just as fiercely as any human parent. "Sir," Briggs said urgently, command channels lighting up. "I want confirmation that the sector is clear." Orion looked at his sergeant, then at the child, then at the weapon in his hands. Everything he built his identity on was crumbling, but for the first time in decades, he knew exactly what he needed to do. "Briggs, I need you to listen very carefully," he said, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades of command. "This sector is clear. No enemy combatants found. Do I make myself understood?" Briggs stared at him for a long moment, then slowly lowered his weapon. "Yes, sir. Sector clear." Orion turned back to the child, extending his hand slowly. She looked at it, then at his face, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended species, programming, and the hatred of generations. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you somewhere safe, and maybe we can find your family." As they prepared to leave the ruined shelter, Orion realized he'd finally found something worth fighting for, the chance that tomorrow might be different than yesterday.